Good evening. Calling this meeting of the Jacksonville Planning Advisory Board for Tuesday, December 9th to order. And at this point, I will ask Dr. Lazan to lead us in the pledge and deliver our invocation.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, we're just so thankful for this day that you've brought us together as a board, and we can make some good decisions for our city. And we're just thankful for how you've blessed the city of Jacksonville over all the years and as of today. And we're so thankful to have the military presence here and the great citizens of this town. And we continue to ask for your outpouring of your spirit upon us and the blessings, especially this time of year, and what this time of year really represents to so many different people in so many different ways. But you'll continue to bless this town as we move forward and as we continue to grow and make smart choices. I ask for blessing on each of the board members here and also with the planning department and any people with the city of Jacksonville, to our families and our friends, and that we wish them the best of health and good cheer. But right now, more than anything, I just lift up the nation in our state and the people that seem to be forgotten, and so much going on in Western North Carolina, and the people there are hurting, and we ask for your blessing on their lives. And sometimes we get so caught up in all the good things we have here. And let's reach out to our fellow human beings and help them, and put aside our political differences, and that we're here to serve you, to serve mankind, and that we are your hands and we are feet. And we just thank you so much, Lord. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. There we go. Thank you. Before I ask to have the agenda adopted by my fellow board members, Ryan, I think it might be nice to introduce our brand spanking new board member.
Will do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Jerry March. He is our Neighborhood Improvement Services Advisory Committee, I believe it is, NESAC, representative. So he's one of, I think there's 5 of you that kind of serve as dual roles on 2 boards. And he was recently selected, and council appointed him to the Planning Advisory Board in that dual role beginning this month. And we're glad to have Mr. March on the board. And I think that leaves us with 1 slot open, which is an ETJ rep that would have to be appointed by the county. And if you know anybody, or if anybody on G10 land's listening, if you're interested in serving on the Planning Advisory Board in our ETJ capacity, feel free to reach out to us, contact the city clerk, or the county clerk, and express that interest, fill out the necessary applications to join the board, because we have that 1 vacancy, or we'd be at 100% full staffed on the Planning Advisory Board. So look forward to having him provide service here on the planning board with all of the rest of you.
Very good. Thank you, Ryan. And welcome, Mr. Jerry March. Good to have you on here, sir. All right. At this point, my fellow board members have an agenda in front of them, and I would ask that you take a peek at that, and I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as provided.
Motion to adopt the agenda, provided we strike out the Tuesday, December 9th and change it to
Second.
Monday.
I'll second that.
I've got a motion and a second. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign? There we go. Thank you. All right, we have review and approval of the minutes from our last meeting. If you've had a chance to peruse those, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
So moved.
Thanks, sir. Can I get a second?
Second.
There we go. We have a second. I hope the delay wasn't because somebody has seen something they didn't like in the minutes. So, all right. Well, we have a motion and a second with no discussion. If any, I would ask you to approve that motion by saying aye.
Aye.
And anyone opposed, like sign? That carries. So we have our minutes. I see that Councilman Logan Sosa is not with us this evening. Ryan, would you like to fill in?
Will, thank you very much. Councilman Sosa sent his regards. So tonight I will go over the December 9th council liaison report. On November the 19th, City Council took the following action. Number one, the text amendment for the use-specific standards dealing with outdoor displays and also some signage regulations. That was something that they heard in October, and then they brought it back after deferring action. They decided to move that forward, which changed several items. So that was approved. And then they had a public hearing to consider the terms and conditions for the Georgetown Landing Master Plan, which the board provided their recommendation on. I believe that was last month as well. And council did approve the modification, which reduced the density, changed the land uses to from apartments and commercial to the single family and townhouses, and reduced the commercial aspects. And then the third item that council approved was dealing with where we eliminated the acreage requirements in the plan unit development districts that would hopefully free up some opportunities for utilization of the plan unit development of the PUD district, because we have only had 2 over the last 10 years since the UDO was adopted. We hope that that will create some development opportunities. And since I'm acting as kind of as the council report, I'll just go ahead and put this out. I thought that the Jacksonville staff that put on the Winterfest this past weekend did a phenomenal job. The lights downtown Jacksonville on the riverfront are fabulous. They did the Christmas tree lighting, so if you hadn't had an opportunity to go see that, please do so. There's been a lot of hard work put on that, and it looks really great. So it seemed like they had a pretty good turnout from what I could tell, had good weather. You just thank that group of folks there at the Parks and Rec that made that happen. So with that, that's all that I have as far as the liaison report goes.
Thanks, Ryan, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I think the Winterfest was tremendous. It was well attended, and it closed with the flotilla, followed by the lighting of the tree, and it was all spectacular. They really outdid themselves. And I would encourage anybody that hasn't driven down there once it's dark to see the lighting through the Riverwalk Park. It really is just spectacular. So, all right. We have no old business, but we have some new business in front of us. Who's on deck? Jeremy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman and members of the Planning Advisory Board. Agenda item 1 is a proposed Unified Development Ordinance text amendment to Article 4, subsection 4.2, D, commercial uses. Specifically, this is use-specific standards as they relate to self-storage facilities. Use-specific standards were adopted with the UDO in 2014. These standards that are those that go above and beyond the universal development standards of parking, landscaping, signage for specific land uses. These can be self-storage facilities, some industrial uses, adult establishments. They're just additional standards in the Unified Development Ordinance that in most cases are stricter than your normal standards. However, we've identified through a submitted UDO text amendment by Mr. Edwin T. Rose that this can prove to be difficult to apply to existing facilities prior to the 2014 adoption of the Unified Development Ordinance. And with his proposal and staff's concurrence, it is being proposed to amend self-storage facility use-specific standards to grant the TRC, or the city manager and their designee, some flexibility in the application of those use-specific standards when you have a multi-building self-storage facility that receives casualty damage, be it fire, natural disaster, to 50% or less of the buildings on site. That would give staff flexibility in application of the self-storage facility standards. If the developer needed to put it back the way it was, if it's just one building or two, if it's still under the 50% threshold, or flex on some of the standards. When it comes to self-storage facilities, one of the biggest impacts is visibility of garage bay doors from the street. That may be very difficult for an existing site to accomplish. It could completely change the business model of that self-storage facility to something else that were just maybe very impractical. If this amendment were to be approved, recommended and approved to City Council, it would give us that flexibility of dealing with some of these legal non-conforming sites.
So, Jeremy, in English, what you're saying is that if one of the buildings was damaged, you would originally only look at that building and decide whether that was 50% or not. Now we look at the entirety of the
whole development, this whole site.
Good, okay.
So the way it's written right now, just let's say we have one of our older sites, it received casualty damage, one of the buildings had to be torn down and they want to rebuild. Well, that new building would have to meet our today's standard. Shielding, garage bay doors, materials of the building, layout, distance from other buildings, and the way it's used. So with all that being said, staff is recommending that the Planning Advisory Board recommend the proposed text amendment that is consistent with adopted CAMA Plan Policy 38.2, that development regulations need to be responsive to innovative development proposals and existing conditions. This amendment is reasonable and in the public interest. Staff recommends approval of the attachment A. I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board may have. Our language as is proposed in the ordinance is consistent with other sections of the ordinance that gives staff that flexibility, hardships.
This allows them to build it back to originally how it was. Basically, it doesn't allow them to like further develop the property into like a, let's say, a 3-story.
Correct. It would be as it was. That's where, if the strict application of the ordinance as it now creates difficulties, just can't be met without significant improvements or redevelopment of the site, is the way we've written it in there. It gives us that flexibility. And you could argue that it could keep nonconformances in perpetuity. That's why we are proposing that 50% threshold. If it exceeds more, and that's consistent too with everything in our ordinance. If you have casualty damage of 50% to any kind of non-conforming building, it now has to comply. Not just with Unified Development Ordinance. Typically, your building and fire code kick in then too.
Sure.
Let me just give you a crazy hypothetical. You got a 10-building apartment complex, all built out of wood construction. Hypothetically, we require brick today. One of those 10 buildings, 24 units, burns to the ground. To rebuild that building, they got to build that back brick when all the other 9 buildings are going to look like wood construction.
That's right.
Same thing here, but this is specific to the mini storage. You may have 10, 15, 20 buildings, you may have 3 buildings. And if one of those buildings gets destroyed up to 50%, or beyond 50%, they have to meet today's standards.
And this will protect
This
them.
creates a provision to allow that singular building to be built back as long as it's not more than 50% of the development. Now, if there's 2 buildings on site and one of them burns down and that building is bigger of the 2, then they're going to have to comply with today's standards. So this may not solve the problem for every single example, but if you have multiple buildings and one of the building gets damaged, this creates provision that the ordinance doesn't currently have.
It seems very commonsensical, so I take this moment to thank Mr. Rose for working with staff to catch that and engage. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the proposed amendment found in attachment A, that the amendment is reasonable in the public interest.
A second.
We have a motion and a second to approve as discussed. Any other further discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign? That carries. Very good. Jeremy, next topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Agenda item 2 is a proposed text amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance, specifically Article 5, subsection 5.1, off-street parking, loading, and circulation. Throughout the UDO, duplexes are synonymous with single-family dwellings. When the UDO talks about single-family dwellings, it'll say the following section applies to single-family dwellings and duplexes. That goes to landscaping, layout, subdivisions. However, it does differ in parking. Currently, the UDO requires a single-family dwelling, just 2 parking spaces, regardless of the number of bedrooms that that home may have. However, duplexes, which is just single-family attached, whereas single-family detached is 1 home, duplex is 2 units, it requires 1 parking space per unit and then 1 parking space per bedroom. In most cases, if you have a duplex, it has one parking space for the unit. Then if it's 2 bedrooms, that's an additional parking space for those. So if you have a 2-unit duplex, both with 2 bedrooms, that's 6 total parking spaces they've got to provide. Tidewater and Associates has submitted this application for amendment, and working with staff, we agree that if duplexes are compared in contrast with single-family dwelling throughout the ordinance, then they should have the same parking standard. So they are proposing to amend the UDO to require only 2 base parking spaces for a duplex. The impacts of this are many, primarily stormwater. That's less impervious surface that would be required on site. And it will keep, when you have a duplex subdivision, it'll keep down your driveways and keep down your parking, making it more comparable to your single-family developments. And we are seeing more and more duplexes as the need for housing variety in the city stays on the rise. With all that being said, staff is recommending approval of this submitted text amendment, that it is consistent with CAMA Plan Policy 6.9, encourages balanced land use mix through flexible zoning and subdivision regulations that facilitates compatible development of a variety of housing types and density, and that the amendment is reasonable and in the public interest. I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
So is this what we're seeing in other communities outside Jacksonville?
Ryan may have, but we did look at Fayetteville's, and theirs is consistent, and they have the same, I will say it's the same exact UDO, but it was drafted by the same consultant. And we go, that's our first stop, is to look at the city of Fayetteville and see how they're handling it. They are a much larger population than us, but they are a similar dynamic military community. And they see the same interaction with housing that we do from those who use it. And they've seemed it they actually group it right in. If you look at the way we're proposing it, we're keeping duplex as its own individual use, but they have residential uses. These only require 2 spaces.
How about New Hanover?
We had not compared. We hadn't looked at at New Hanover County.
Only reason saying it because everything's kind of pushing it this way.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So one thing, like Jeremy mentioned, it was Fayetteville's UDO is drafted by Clare and Associates, so the layout is the same. We can literally open up online their webpage and go straight to this section. We know exactly where to look for it, so it makes it really easy.
Right.
And since we are similar, it's
Yeah.
additionally, they've had their UDO longer than we have, so they've been kind of trialing it longer than we have. Coupled with, for the longest, since 2010, we really haven't had a whole lot of development as far as single family or duplexes. And as Jeremy stated, we're seeing kind of an uptick in that development. So even though the UDO here is 10 years old, it's really the first time that we're applying these standards on such a large scale. We've had a couple of duplexes on infill lots, and there really was no mention of it. But the lot width situation that we've already talked about, and now the parking. Now that we're applying these standards, some people are like, well, why is it taking you 10 years? Well, we just haven't had to apply them to see, wait a minute, we kind of went the wrong way when the UDO was adopted, and we're just now discovering. That's not a good thing, it's not a bad thing, it's a fact. So that's why we look at Fayetteville, because it's really easy for us to, versus like a few months ago, we polled other cities and towns, and we gave them 5 yes or no answers. And so often the response is, well, here's the link to our ordinance online, you can go find it. Well, that means that we have to go online and interpret their code. And then sometimes there's stuff in the UDO, sometimes there's stuff in the city code. And then if we're going to come back and report to the planning board and the council that this is how Fayetteville, this is how New Hanover, this is how Greenville's doing it, I don't want to get up here, and Jeremy doesn't want to get up here and tell you, yeah, this is how they do it, and us not be 100% behind what we're telling you. So that's why Fayetteville is kind of a staple for us to go straight to. We could also go to Currituck County, but sometimes county dynamics versus a municipality is a little different. Currituck County was drafted by Clarion as well. And we do look at theirs, and then Rock Hill, South Carolina. Fayetteville is just so similar to us, that's where the go-to is. So as the question was asked, and as Jeremy mentioned, the duplex with what we're proposing is identical to what Fayetteville applies or requires.
Are you aware of anybody that was negatively impacted by that requirement to have the parking place plus two more?
We've had a couple of duplexes that have been on infill lots that they had to build bigger driveway pads like Jeremy's talking about, and it's visible. It's obvious.
Yeah.
Some that come to mind are we had 2 new duplexes built on Sybil Street behind McDonald's on
That's
Alva
the
70.
one that I was thinking of, but
If you go by them,
Yeah.
it stands out. You know, they provided a very large parking area to accommodate it.
Yeah.
Whereas this would keep their driveway similar to your typical single-family home.
But if duplex, you would technically have 2 families,
Correct.
but you're only giving them 1 parking spot.
No,
if I
they'll have 2
misunderstand.
spaces, 4 total, 2 each.
Okay.
2
you.
each. Yeah.
Okay.
Right now, they have to have, most of your duplexes are 2-bedroom. I have not seen the old duplex with the single room. That just isn't the way it is anymore. To make it market ready, most of your duplexes are 2-bedroom. The way it's written right now, they have to have 6 total spaces, 3 on each side.
or a 3-bedroom would be 8 spaces.
That's right. So that step up is real fast. You had a 3rd bedroom to each one, you get 4 more spaces, or 2 more spaces on each side, or a space on each side. And then they get into the threshold of, hey, now you got to build a stormwater pond or some kind of facility to treat it.
Would this requirement, if adopted by council, would that prohibit somebody from building a duplex and putting in, if they wanted to put in a larger?
So probably not. I do not, but we do have driveway limitations in the front yard. Up to the first 40 feet, you're limited to 750 square feet of parking area or 33%, whichever's less. We have talked about possibly coming back with a text amendment in the future.
We were going to include it with
We
this
were
one,
actually
but we
going to include
decided
it with
not
the night,
to.
but we didn't want to sidetrack the board. In one hand, you can say, if someone wants to, not that they would, I have yet to see it in the city, there may be 1 or 2. If someone wanted to pave their entire front yard, right now they can't. We have a restriction. And that brings difficulty for folks who live on Gum Branch or some of our busier roads who could benefit from a circle drive, enter one way, exit the other. In fact, just recently, I just tell someone you don't have enough room. I said, you're right at 700 square feet. So you could widen your driveway on site, but to add anything, you'd have to go further than 40 feet. So we may be bringing that back as a discussion item for the planning board to look at.
Under this proposal, we've got some duplexes and they each have a driveway. As long as 2 cars fit in the one driveway,
Right.
it's still conforming.
That's right. And that's the one thing, single family in duplexes right now, the way it's written in the ordinance, they don't have to specifically delineate parking spaces, like you're not going to see stripes and a wheel stop. It just has to be that size. 18 by 9 times 2 on each side. That's typical driveway size. Ironically, Tidewater submitted this amendment, but that's the typical driveway size they use in the new subdivision Harvest Meadows.
But this change will not create nonconformities. If anything, it's going to allow some to be eliminated.
Yep.
So this proposal, by reducing the number of parking spaces required, it's going this direction, not that direction.
And
So
a lot of those come up in mine in the backside of Bryn Mawr towards Corbin. There's a lot of duplex subdivisions over there.
How do the parking requirements for townhouses, how do they compare to the duplexes? Are they?
So townhomes right now are 2.5 spaces per unit. Doesn't take into account bedrooms.
Okay. So it's basically on par with that. too.
Right.
Okay.
Now, parking is expansionally larger when you get to multifamily. That's your apartment complexes or townhomes that will not be fee simple. They won't be divided off. There'll be townhomes on one parcel. They're treated like apartments because the UDO defines a townhome as its own lot.
Okay.
So, multifamily, like it probably should, and I believe it does correctly, have a much larger parking standard. Because your townhomes, your duplexes, yeah, I mean, you may be looking at 70-30 where they are ownership. They're more, we are seeing more now that are more practical for your first-time home buyer, just because of the way the market is.
And then what are the, like, is it illegal to park on the street?
Depends on if there's no parking, if it's a city street versus a DOT. Specifically, I can talk about the brand-new subdivision, Harvest Meadows. They were approved with a reduced road standard, but the benefit of that comes with you cannot park on the street. Those will be taken over by the city, but you cannot park on the street there. However, downtown, you can park on the street. There's several areas in Northwoods, off of Gum Branch Road, those neighborhoods. Yes, the Commons, you can park on the street.
The Traffic and Safety Committee establishes where there's no on-street parking. So it'll be signed. Then you have 15 feet within the intersection you shouldn't park in. That's in the city code. But the example that Jeremy's given of the 26 feet, they basically reduced the construction cost of building the road at 31 feet back to back to 26. Problem is, if you have one row of cars, now you've reduced that minimum lot width that's needed for the fire apparatus vehicle. So the caveat is if you want to shrink the road widths, which saves money in your development costs, it's cheaper to pour a concrete driveway than it is to build a road. So as long as you can accommodate a certain number of cars based on per bedroom, that's in our MSSDs, our manual specification standards and design. So that's the public services standards that they allow, they determine how the streets are built. So you can do that reduction. The caveat is you got to provide on-site parking. It's not in the UDO. It's because of that reduced width. The idea behind it is you will not have any on-street parking because of the fire apparatus vehicles.
And some of those homes in Harvest Meadows are 4-bedroom homes, and so they've maxed out their maximum size of their driveway by having a 4-car size. Now, that's 2 cars stacked right in there, or they may have a little turnout over. It just depends on how the lot is laid out. But it's definitely shown the limits of the ordinance and applicability, and this is kind of a step where we want to come back to the board at a future date and discuss some applications. I think they were good at one time in the way development occurs, but as we move forward, I think the ordinance, just like we do all the time, needs to be reevaluated.
And I guess where I was getting at that was where if we have like a 3-bedroom duplex, you're gonna have potentially, let's say 3 Marines, they room together or something, you could have the potential for 3 cars. So now you're
Correct.
putting 2 cars in a driveway, and then you're just gonna have 1 parking.
Just
more
like
than
with
likely in
a
the street.
single-family home that may have 5 bedrooms, they may rent,
Right.
you may have 5 Marines renting out a single family, which I can point to several areas in the city that are just like that, but the UDO currently limits them to 2 parking spaces. I think stormwater would start to have issues if we started requiring more and more parking, just based off of bedrooms alone, and I think it is more logical with single-family, detached or attached, to keep it limited. Now, if they want to add more, then they may have that ability.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Anybody care to tackle this one?
I'll make a motion to approve agenda item 2 under the Unified Development Ordinance, Development Standards, subsection 5.1.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to essentially approve what Jeremy's been talking about here.
Thank you.
So, any further discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign. Motion carries, sir. Okay. Ryan, we're going to talk about public comment, huh?
That we will do, Mr. Chairman. So, since I don't have any slides, I don't need the clicker tonight. So, good evening, Chairman, board members. As some of you may recall, back in 2009, the Planning Advisory Board adopted some rules and procedures to allow public engagement at the beginning of the public comment during the meeting. We're proposing now, because we're doing things differently than we did back then. Back then, we used to send courtesy notices out in advance of the planning board to allow people to come speak on an item that will then go to city council to have the public hearing. So we doubled our advertising costs. It's not technically a public hearing. It doesn't require per statute to be a public hearing. So that's when we adopted the rules. And then at some point over the last 5 or 10 years, we stopped doing that because it's not required by statutes, but yet we still have these rules and procedures. So one of council's, I believe that this proposed change would fit within council's goals is engaging the citizens, the residents. We looked at planning boards across the state and their agendas, and basically what we determined was that many jurisdictions provide 15 minutes at the beginning of every meeting. They limit speakers to 3 minutes, so that's 5 speakers that would get an opportunity to come speak at the beginning of the meeting to talk about the weather, to talk about an agenda item, to talk about something they would like to see the board recommend to council, whatever it may be. Allow your citizenry to come in and talk to the board. Not a question and answer session, but just, hey, I get 3 minutes to tell you, how the weather is today. So we're proposing that we eliminate those 2009 rules and replace them, just like we did back then, with council's adopted rules that we've modified to reflect the planning board. So you'll see in attachment A that is the current rules and procedures, and then attachment A. And then attachment B would be the proposed rules. And then the agenda would look different next month. We will basically plug in a public comment section at the beginning of every agenda. And if there's people that want to speak, in favor or opposition of something that's being considered, or tell you that they think the landscaping ordinance is horrible or phenomenal, whatever it may be, it would give people that opportunity. So with that being said, we conversed with the city attorney, and he felt that the existing policy was in need of a revamp. And in light of we're not sending out those courtesy notices anymore, we agree with him. And that's why we've came up with this proposal that beginning 2025, we would create this public comment period at the beginning of every agenda. If there's nobody that signs up, then, the chairperson can ask, is there anybody here that didn't sign up? And if they want to speak, let them speak. And then at the end, close that session, and then we're done with public comment for the night. So with that being said,
Is this bringing us in alignment with city council? Is that what the goal is?
no, the goal is that to allow the planning board to receive public comment.
Right.
We're just simply taking council's public comment rules and proposing to modify them to reflect the board to provide some
I think that's what I was trying to
procedures.
say, that they're already doing this.
Well, two different things. They have a public comment, so yes, this would be your public comment. Then they have a public hearing that is separate for each different agenda item that requires a public hearing.
Okay.
So keeping those separate.
Okay. All right.
Ryan, does this mean that when if we do this, that when we're discussing something else, we can't ask people to come up and give us an opinion on something?
I think that if the chairperson recognizes somebody to get clarification, then obviously the chairperson can ask for that clarification. That's kind of how we've done things already. This is really to provide an opportunity for somebody to be able to get up here that may not be the applicant, that may have concerns with what the board's getting ready to consider. It's not a public hearing, so it's not required advertisements. We're not going to be doing any of that. But it gives people the opportunity to speak, and then there's some specific standards in which they have to follow. And then it'll become part of the agenda every meeting. So we will start, I've looked at it, I can't remember if I'm going to plug it underneath the, it would be before the adoption of the agenda, I would imagine. So probably between the invocation and the adoption of the agenda, we would plug in a public comment session, and it'd be 15 minutes, 3 minutes per speaker, unless the board wants to tweak these rules. But it says in here that, if you've got 30 people and they all want to speak, that if the chairperson wants to let the time period go longer, they can extend it with the vote of the board, I believe is how it's written here.
I think it's written that if, someone if you were speaking, Ryan, he could extend it longer to 5 minutes or something like that if he really wanted to hear what you were saying, is how I interpreted.
Well, so number one is 15 minutes. The total time may be extended by consensus of the board. So if there's 30 people here and you don't think 15 minutes is going to cut it, you all have to decide whether you're going to extend it. So that's number one. Then with number two, each speaker gets 3 minutes, unless you all, as the board, extend that time, but then you have to treat everybody the same. So if you want to extend Sally, who's speaking, and her 3 minutes are up, and you want to give them 5, that means now you got to give everybody another 2 minutes. It's up to the board. But it will be the consensus of the board versus the current policy says the chairperson can either allow or not allow. This requires the board to weigh in on, do we extend, do we change what these rules are as our common rules?
A couple thoughts here, Ryan. I like the idea, and then as Homer pursued, that this is that 15 minutes at the beginning of the meeting, not to be confused with if there was some, for example, tonight, Mr. Rose is still with us, had there been a question about what he was trying to do, or, to give us a finer point, we can ask him to come up and do that, and that has nothing to do with what we're talking about now.
And he's an applicant as well. So, I think that
Yeah.
that's
So,
certainly
good.
within the purview, but if just there's somebody that's from the public and they say all of a sudden, hey, I want to speak to that.
Yeah, at that point, that's kind of up to me, right? If I'm running the meeting.
If you want to allow them to come up and speak, but then, the fair and equitable part comes into play. So, if you allow one to get up and talk, then to me, these rules are set to where you get 15 minutes. This is their opportunity to air it out at the beginning, not to then be able to say, come back and say, I want to add another 5 minutes later on because I just thought of something different.
Yeah, that's pretty clear that doesn't happen, so. How many, I know I've only been on the board for a couple, 3 years. In your recollection, you think this would become a forum for people to want to come and chat with us? Or chat, I guess?
In 24 years, we don't normally have many folks other than applicants that show up.
Yeah.
But if you create this opportunity, that's not on the agenda today. So it very well could cause folks to come out and say, hey, I want to talk to you about planning items. I want to just talk to you about city stuff in general.
Yeah.
Could be real positive.
But that's just at the first, that's at the beginning of our meeting.
This will be at the beginning of every meeting, 15 minutes.
Once we get into the agenda, like at item number 1, that's where it stops, unless, and then there's no room for public comment unless he allows it, or more importantly, is a clarification if Mr. Rose let me clarify that, he can call him up because he's an applicant.
Right, because it's not a public hearing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a big difference, yeah.
Well,
Okay.
be careful what you ask for. Sometimes you get it. So, any other questions about this item? I think I understand it. I see it could be a very positive thing. I could also see, we could be talked to.
Does this go to the city council for approval as well? That we just approve this?
This would be
So we can
your
make
board, this is your
modifications
board's rules and procedures for public comment. You could say, we don't want to have public comment at all, and eliminate what's in attachment A, and we're not going to adopt attachment B if you wanted to.
So we can modify this in the future if it becomes an issue.
Yeah.
So this is something we got to vote on.
Yeah.
That's correct.
I thought maybe just bringing to our attention, saying, okay, this is what we're doing moving forward, okay.
This would be repealing what's in attachment A from 2009 and replacing it with this new proposal in attachment B.
Does council care that we do or don't, other than potentially offering the opportunity to engage our citizens?
We have not said, hey, what do you think about planning board having a public comment? We've had internal discussions, but one of the council's goals is to, engage with the citizens. So, I mean, this is an opportunity for citizens to engage with city business, so.
Amen. Let's say you had a particularly grueling agenda for us one night with, say, 8 or 9 or 10 things on it. Is there a provision that we make an exception that evening and not include, or once we open this door, we're committed to doing it every meeting?
We would be doing this every meeting the way this is written.
All right.
The way I'm understanding is, though, if we move to this new format, the first 15 minutes, whether you have one item or you have 10, once we get into the agenda, the comment section is already stopped. We're moving on through business.
That's right. And there might be no one that wants to say anything.
Hearing, okay, that's left for city council.
So tonight, you could have had 6 minutes if these two gentlemen decided to speak during the public comment session. And at the end of the 6 minutes, you guys are going to say, all right, we're moving on to agenda item number 1, or whatever the next part is on the agenda.
And they're not allowed to jump in and comment on what we're talking about anyway.
That's right.
At that point. Yeah.
Correct.
So it doesn't make a difference how many items on the agenda. It just becomes part of the format. Like
It's
we have
up to
an
15.
opening, we bring the meeting to order, this, and we do this all before we ever get to the agenda.
If there's a crowd here, you've extended the meeting by 15 minutes at minimum
That
if
was
you
my
allow
thing.
5 people talk.
Say we had, again, a very long agenda, knowing that we would probably spend a lot of time there, is it possible to stop it? And he's basically saying no. So
Yeah, you just
we
limit it.
we are potentially adding 15 minutes
Correct.
to every meeting, potentially. I mean, again, a night like this evening, chances are nobody would have said anything,
Yeah.
so. Okay.
It's like use or lose it.
And if you have 10 people that sign up, what will we do then?
First 5.
First 5.
Okay.
25.
I mean, I don't see any harm that can be from it. I mean, you might find somebody that comes up and brings up an idea, says something like, well, how come you guys don't regulate how far apart convenience stores are? Because it seems like they dot the landscape, that kind of thing.
That's right.
And then that just plants a seed, and then we start thinking about it, so.
And that's
Can't hurt.
that citizen engagement part. The citizens may come here and say, I'm tired of the way that this looks, or the way that this happens.
And it may or may not be in our purview.
It may not be. It could be something about, how come the potholes are still on Hendricks Avenue? I mean, it's 15 minutes, 3 minutes per speaker, but we also have a council liaison here, and there's members of other boards. There's 5 of you that are on other boards. I mean, there could be something
All right.
Maybe we'll get prime time.
I was at a private event over the weekend, and someone said, hey, there's a water leak at this address. I sent the information in, because I'm a public servant. So, hey, I will get it to the right people. So sometimes it's one of those things where, hey, look, 6 o'clock time works good for them. The 5:30 doesn't. So it could be that you get somebody that can't make it to a council at 5:30, but they might be able to make the planning board at 6. You have a council liaison that's here. You got folks on boards. Their voice it gives another opportunity for their voice to be heard. So I don't think that there's any harm in it.
Okay.
I think that it could extend your meetings up to 15 minutes, but in most cases, if you look at the history, it wouldn't have added a whole lot of time.
I mean, I think the new format, kind of lays out a lot more specific rules. There were not some impromptu questions that can come up. Okay?
Yeah, that's not
We
the
got,
point.
we got 15 minutes, that's for public comment, and then it's up to us whether we want to extend that time. We don't have to. It's just 15 minutes to engage the public, hear what's going on. They can ask us, make their comments, and then once that closes, then boom, we move on to our agenda for the evening. But I think it lays out a little more clear definition of some of the rules and format.
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, this will not be a question and answer session. This won't be a debate session. This is like what council does. This is their opportunity to get up and speak what's on their mind, as long as they're respectful and polite.
Right.
and say, hey, I think that the city's sign regulations are too stringent or not, business friendly enough, whatever it may be. It's their opportunity to speak their mind and provide their thoughts to the board. Not, hey, what are you going to do about this? Nope, we're not going to answer questions. This is
Just
your
here,
opportunity to voice
listen.
some concerns.
That's it. We're just here to listen. Maybe we can gain something that later on may need to be addressed, but
That's right.
we're more of a listening.
No,
That's it.
And it may be that next month you have a UDO amendment or Unified Development Ordinance amendment for parking in for duplexes. In the last month or 2 months ago, somebody said, there's not enough parking in a duplex. You need to have more parking. That could help you, or at that meeting that night, hey, I'm not in favor of this because there's not going to be enough parking. Whatever it may be, it could cause the board to ask questions or, hey, I want more information before I'm willing to make a recommendation on that change.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
there is input that the board could use or take from somebody in a decision that you decide to make.
Cool. I guess I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve the changes for procedures for public comment.
Second.
And we have a second. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, I would ask that if you think this is a great idea and you want to vote yes for the motion, give me an aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign? There you have it, sir. Thank you, Ryan, well done. We are here to serve voluntarily, I might add. So I'm going to ask Ryan to give us any report that he has, and we've been doing this each month where we have kind of a little educational piece that we think that the public would like to know. And last month was outbuildings, Dr. Lazan sheds and she sheds and all that. And Ryan did a nice job of explaining, that when people consider that, they need to probably engage city planning before they do it, because they may run afoul. So tonight, Ryan, tell us about fencing. I'm talking residential, putting up a fence in your yard, around your yard, whatever. What might the citizenry of Jacksonville need to know as an overview, what they need to think about?
Okay, so, excuse me, fences for residential, that's all I'm talking about. I'm not talking about commercial, just residential. The maximum height is 6
And
feet.
you have 90 seconds, sir.
Okay, 6 feet in the rear yard, so from the front corner of the house back, 6 feet. Anything in front of the house, maximum of 4 feet tall. Permits are not required. That doesn't mean we don't have standards, it just means you don't have to have a permit. They have to be on your property, they cannot be in the right-of-way, they cannot be in easements. So, if you have a fence company that goes out and installs a fence and they put in an easement, and we have to come in there and maintain a sewer line or stormwater line, then we're going to move the fence, because it shouldn't be there. That's one of the negative sides of not having a permit requirement when we have standards. We have that throughout the ordinance, where we have standards but no permit. So we've had a situation in the past where somebody calls and says, hey, do I need a permit for a fence? Nope, you're good. You don't have to have a fence permit. But the better question is, do you have any standards? And that was kind of the question tonight. So yes, we do have standards. They can't be made out of household goods and junk. So we do have some material requirements as well on what it can be and what it can't be. So that's kind of residential fences in a quick synopsis.
And if they have a question, they can either contact you, can they go on the city's website and find those requirements, what's allowed?
You can go into Article 5 of the Unified Development Ordinance, which is online. It's on the planning page, it's not on the Muni Code. There's an actual web page with the full 600-page Unified Development Ordinance. It's in Article 5. Jeremy, do you know the exact section? Article 5.5 or 5.6, somewhere in the middle of Article 5.
5.5.
And there's a diagram that shows kind of that summarizes where the 4 foot is versus the 6, things of that nature. So it's online, or they can come to City Hall or call City Hall and ask for the planning department, and Jeremy and I'll be happy to answer their questions and send them information accordingly.
What about which direction it faces?
We do not regulate which direction it faces.
5.4.
So I can't, can I make a fence out of a bunch of doors that someone gives me?
It's traditional fence materials, chain link, slats, material, lumber, or vinyl, timber tech, anything that was built to be made to what a fence should be made out of. We
Don't
actually-
think doors are going to work.
We actually had a
They'd be
case,
taller than 6 foot, wouldn't they? I mean.
You could cut them.
Yeah.
we actually had a case where someone had constructed a fence, just took pallets and put them side by side. It's untreated.
Ryan, thank you.
Yep.
I appreciate the update on fences. The takeaway for me is, if you have any questions, contact you guys. I mean, you'd be safe. So you have any other report for us,
I
sir?
do. It's the end of 2024. Can we believe it? I mean, just next month, it's going to be 2025. So appreciate all the board members' service over this past year and the years before that. We appreciate all that you do in making us, think outside the box and being better prepared when we bring an agenda item to you, because we have to think about those things before we do bring it to you. And look forward to 2025. And since I already talked about the Riverwalk in my liaison report, I was going to talk about that today in reports, but got that done. And hope everybody has happy holidays and a happy new year, and see you in January. We will have a meeting, as far as we know, slated for
No
January.
promises.
Stay
If
tuned.
something happens where we won't, then we'll let you know, but
Good. Well, thank you for the support that, Ryan, that you and Jeremy give us. We serve at the, as volunteers at the pleasure of the city council, and we try very hard to use common sense and the collective wisdom of those assembled here to make what we consider to be the best decision we know how to do. So, anyway, I would ask that we have.
one other thing. So because council does not have their typical second meeting in the month of December, these items, as well as some items that went, that you all considered last month that didn't make it in November, will be heard in January. So
good. Thanks.
these two items, two of the three, will be in front of council in at the January meeting, and I think there's one or two other items that will be, that won't be heard by council until January as well. I think there's one or two.
Yep, January 21st.
So we'll have about 3 or 4 planning items.
And our next meeting would be when in January?
We talked about that, didn't we?
January 13th.
January 13th. So there you go. So that will be also our first meeting where public comment will be available. So I wish everybody a happy holiday, safe, enjoy yourselves, and I would entertain a motion from the board to adjourn.
So moved.
I got a motion. Got a motion?
Keep it open.
I'll second it.
We have a second. All in favor of adjourning and a happy new year, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?